Hello. So this is Edward Gray in Captivity, continuing a series on some SCA sword work. I had a few requests to go through some of my longsword stuff. I wanted to start that off with a clear admission that I'm not the master when it comes to longsword. I've had a fair amount of success, but I've got a long way to go in terms of what I know and my own development. And in that regard, I was reminded by a Master Llewellyn that I ought to do a little bit more reading and review some of my manuals, and he, of course, recommends Christian Toppler. Hopefully that'll look familiar to some. But the things in the areas where I have had some success come from the following. First, power development, which is hand in hand with commitment to your stroke, right? With longsword, you've got a single item on your sword to act both as your offense and defense. So you have to commit to your attacks so that your person gets behind your sword. And one of the things I'm going to talk to momentarily is in the SCA, many of us have learned the bad habit of developing the power through the body and then extending into the sword, as opposed to allowing the sword to lead the line and make sure that you're behind it. Traditional fencers and others learn that lesson right off the bat. Some of us get a cheat hiding behind a shield, or pull weapon in a melee situation. I'll talk to that a little bit. The other thing I want to go to after that is one of the beauties of longsword work and the current manuals available to us is the great number of guards that are explained in some detail. The thing that I have to continuously remind people of is that these guards are not necessarily a static position from which you initiate motion. They are positions through which you have a decision, through which you have an opening, through which you have a transition, through which you are familiar with what to do next. A number of advanced fighters, such as Vec, will talk about you've made your strike, so what do you do next? What is your recover line? Where's your next opening, etc. I will walk through some of these guards in terms of many of these longsword guards are where you end a stroke. And so from what's next, right? I've ended a stroke, I've an extended long point. What do I do next, right? And so as you develop your familiarity with these various guards, you learn what can you do from there and what comes next from this position. And so what's critical with longsword work, or where I've had some success, is both understanding how to transition between these various guards when the one I'm in doesn't serve my current purpose. And so the thing to do is first learn what your guards are, what you can do from each of them, and then become fluid in how to go from one into the other depending. And all the standard training methods that have been discussed, that I've discussed to date relative to 6 drills, etc., blah, 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 is they can all be practiced with longsword. And what is practiced with longsword can then be transitioned to sword and shield in other forms. And so let me go back through some of these things again. For people who have seen some of my other videos, there will be repeat. But I think I'm going to take this as an opportunity to lead you into, provide a summary today, and then lead into some drills as we go forward on a lesson by lesson plan basis. So just give me a moment to set my phone up. I don't have my regular photographer as I am, in captivity, stuck in a hotel. And just like many who are stuck in an apartment, what do you do when you aren't outside swinging your friends, right? As I've indicated before, I will often use this as my indoor surrogate for a longsword. Center of balance is indicated on the tape there, and right there. Same pommel, equivalent mass. Very similar handling characteristics because the weight and balance point match or closely match my longsword. So something I've talked through a lot is power commitment to that stroke. So you should learn how to develop power from a number of positions or guards, right? And longsword sitting right on your shoulder is one of said guards. But, as I said previously, a number of us have, in the SCA, gotten in the bad habit of perhaps you're used to having a shield out here. I develop power and then extend beyond with authority. But when I do that same motion with a longsword and I step forward, developing power, and then extend, I am vulnerable from here to this point. I'm entirely vulnerable. As opposed to leading with the blade as I develop that power. Okay? Just like if you remember, the Olympics and the hammer throw, where you have this big mass on a chain, the guy has it down here and then spins around, and throws it. And all those spins, he's vulnerable. So you have to not only learn how to develop that power, but you have to learn how to get your sword in front of your person as you advance into range when you can be threatened by your opponent. There's no issue developing power from out of range, but before you close, you have to be committed so that you develop the power, and committed so you're behind your blade, and that this blade creates a threat that your opponent must address. If your opponent isn't concerned by your attack, you are wasting your effort. You are exposing yourself without need. All your attacks must threaten your opponent to be viable. All right? Now, understand I can develop power from the shoulder. I can develop power from on high. Drop it down. I can develop power from behind. I can put that blade on my hip. Simply throw the hip around, right? I can make these circles, right? And so these are the basis, familiarity of power development from circles off the shoulder, from off the hip, from the counter shoulder, from the counter hip, are things that figure into various period German longsword work and similar. So I wanted to start there, fundamentally with you have to develop the power to deliver good strikes. You have to make sure to lead the attack with the blade, not your noggin. And you have to commit to the blow so that you are behind said stroke. Okay, simple stuff. But those are foundational, and every time you face a pel, address an opponent, these have to be the basis for your actions. Additionally, it's worth noting that, particularly with longsword work, you always want to control initiative. All right. The sword and shield, I've got a lot more defense. I have the opportunity to allow my opponent to strike first. Longsword does have a great deal of defensive capability in terms of you can pretty much block everything this way. You can drop your point at range. However, fundamental in certainly German longsword work is this concept of the knock, concept of initiative, concept of dictating the fight to your opponent. Because realize with a longsword, while you have range over a sword or shield fighter, that range difference is pretty minimal and is easily overcome by a single step from your opponent. And if you allow them to dictate that pacing and that positioning, you'll find yourself on the receiving end of their weapon, not yours. I often say that longsword work, when done properly, is beautiful and gorgeous to watch, and if it's not, you're dead. So either you do it right and you own the fight and it looks beautiful. If you are behind the curve and you're allowing your opponent to dictate unto you, you learn to regret that very quickly. The other thing that I will say with longsword work, as well as it can be gorgeous and beautiful in terms of the mechanics, you can also choose when it can be brutal and very powerful. There are times for both, and neither are mutually exclusive. When I started out, the number of techniques that I could develop or deliver were relatively limited. However, middle guard, your ability to strike the line, clean the line, clear it, does a lot of good. You can simply wade in on an opponent, step left, step right, and clear the field of all threats. And if they're not well covered, you can strike through them. It is important to note that the leverage associated with a longsword is certainly greater than that with a single sword. So there's this concept of strike through. So my opponent with a single sword, he steps out, throws an onside shot. The counter to that is simply to step to the line and drop your sword down through his sword stroke, nullifying his attack and striking his arm. Another counter example is if a sword and shield advances on you, simply stepping through, developing a ton of bricks, throwing at their shield, at the center of that shield, just north of it, and then you displace them, push them further from you. You're now more defended, and you can simply recover your blade, back blade to the back of the skull. And these are cases where you simply are overpowering an opponent, but you have to be centered, grounded, and committed to those strikes if you're going to overpower an opponent. The other thing that I've mentioned, right, is I've mentioned this concept of various guards and walk through them. So, rear guard, dragon tail, etc. The blade is behind your person. You can bring this up into a side guard and extend down into long point, where the blade's extended in front of you. This is not done simply for the sake of doing it in this order, but it allows you to decision point all the way through. I have decided from this guard that I will bring and bear the blade high as opposed to laterally, as opposed to around. I've also, once I've gotten here, this is a familiar guard from which I can redirect, pick a different line, and at long point, the terminus of this particular stroke, I can choose what to do next. Perhaps simply thrust forward, the face. Perhaps make a parry and attack. The point being, each of these guards is a decision point from which you can make another choice. Similarly, you can go here on high and strike down to a low guard. And from the low guard, you again have different set of choices that you can make. But you have to first learn the guards, understand what you were able to do from them before you step forward. I'm going to check my notes really quickly. All right. So that was my quick overview. From here, what I'm going to do is develop a couple more lesson plans and go through a refresher on each of these guards. I've had prior videos on commitment and power generation, so I'll leave that to the side. we'll do a quick refresher on these various guards and then some of the opportunities each of them present. Thank you.